In this video, I'm going to talk about 5 things that I found to be terrifying about retirement, but I didn't know that these things were terrifying about retirement before I was in retirement. Now, my retirement journey was kind of a weird thing because I actually officially retired when I was in my 20s, which is a long story, but I worked on and off after that. And then we retired from my husband's job around midlife. And we did early retirement way before it was vogue. So in this video, I want to share with you 5 things that we discovered that were really terrifying about retirement, but we didn't know about these things before retirement, at least not all of them. Hi, I'm Camille Gaines here and on my website, retiresurgeon.com. I write about and talk about investing over the past 40 years or so, as well as our stumble into early retirement that I mentioned. All right, if you like this kind of information, please click the little thumbs up below the video. It helps me move up in the YouTube algorithms, and that way I can provide this information to more people, and it's absolutely free financial education. All right, so the very first thing that is terrifying about retirement is that you lose your ability to earn money, or it certainly feels like you lose your ability to earn money, and you really do, especially now more than previous times, because things are changing so rapidly with technology. It used to be you learned how to do something and that skill could last you for life. There was very little change in industries. Now you can leave an industry for a year, 2 years, sometimes even 6 months. And when you try to re-enter, it's really, really hard to re-enter. So it's scary losing your ability to earn money because, well, what if you're wrong in your retirement planning? And we'll talk more about that in a second. Some of these terrifying things relate to finances, and some things relate to just our lives because, well, life goes on after retirement, right? So that very first thing is simply losing that ability to earn money, and that is a scary thing. The great thing is that now there are so many ways that you can acquire new marketable skills with all the online courses and certifications that just weren't available to previous generations. Not only that, there's just so many ways you can make money now. If you do need to start making money again, then it is certainly more doable than it has been for previous generations. So that's the very first thing. The next thing that's terrifying about retirement is simply sequence of returns risk. Now, I don't know why I said simply. This isn't a simply. This is huge. And I didn't really realize this until a few years ago. And what it is about is people plan on retirement. They plan on living off the money that they've saved and or the income that they have. And so most people plan on making retirement withdrawals. The old rule of thumb, or the sort of probably most popular rule of thumb, is 4%. You've probably heard me talk about it before on this channel if you watch my other videos. Some people suggest 3%. Some people think they can get 5%. It really depends on a number of factors that we won't go into in this video. But the point is, we make retirement plans based on having a set amount of money and making withdrawals from that amount of money to cover our lifestyle expenses. And when we plan on that, we have to make some really big assumptions about how much investment return we're going to get when we're retired, as well as, of course, how long we're going to live. So what happens is, if an investor, say that, and I'm making an assumption here, that people are investing in stocks and probably bonds if they are entering into retirement. Many people are, many investors are, many people that watch my channel. So what we're really looking at here is someone that is invested in stocks and bonds. Most people that watch my channel are investors. And what happens is, in retirement planning, we expect to make a certain amount of investment return over the time frame that we're planning on living off of our investments. But if in the years just preceding or just after we retire, there's a bear market or some other event that changes, that hurts that investment return that we've planned on, then that can completely derail our ability to be able to make those retirement withdrawals for the rest of our lives. We saw this happen when people retired in around 2000, late 1990s, after that big bull market. And then we had the bear markets of the 2000s decade that you've heard me speak of on this channel earlier or otherwise. So that really blew retirement plans for a lot of people. And then we had, of course, the bull market of the 2010s decade. And so going forward, we need to think about what can we realistically expect to make from our money, of course, always. But we also want to consider what might happen in the few years before we retire or after we retire. And that sequence of returns, the way that our returns play out in the time frame, that's what causes sequence of returns risk. The problem is this is a really big unknown. We just don't know this. We can suspect, and there are very logical ways to suspect that the market is overvalued, for example, so we may be heading into a bear market soon, or undervalued, so perhaps we'll enter into a bull market soon, that sort of thing, but we can't know for sure. So sequence of returns risk is a biggie. It's a very terrifying thing as you plan to live off of your retirement savings. The next terrifying thing about entering retirement, or about retirement period, is loss of personal development, because you're no longer advancing in your career. You're no longer having exposure to the people, the network, the mental stimulation that you were exposed to when you were working. When we are working, when we're in our career and we're being productive, we're growing as people. We're constantly learning how to manage things and manage relationships with people and manage our time and be productive. And when that ceases, well, it affects our productivity when there's absolutely nothing that we need to do or need to focus on or try to achieve. And while that can be a really nice thing, it can get really old pretty quickly depending on what your personality type is. So loss of personal development can really be a terrifying thing in retirement, and I think people don't realize it until they sense that it's happening, and then it becomes a real concern. The next terrifying concern in retirement, and this one is pretty much a terrifying thing because it's so outside of our control and it relates to our money, so I'm circling back to that, and that's inflation. So for example, if you spend $7,000 a year in retirement, in 14 years, that will have doubled to over $14,000. So that's based on a 3% annual inflation rate. Now, we don't know what inflation will be going forward, but if we look at that historical rate and use that, in just 14 years, your expenses would have doubled. So if you had $7,000, you would need over $14,000 to sustain that same lifestyle after 14 years. And for a lot of people, most people live more than 14 years in retirement. So inflation is a terrifying thing about retirement, simply because it's so outside of our control. And we got really spoiled with the super low inflation that was at least reported in the 2010 to 2020 decade. And we're not used to high inflation such as we've had as of this recording of this video. Going forward, we don't know what it will be, but there are some solid reasons to think it will be much higher than it has been for the last 10 years or so. All right, so the next terrifying thing about retirement is lack of mental stimulation. Some people really like it. Some people don't really care whether or not they have mental stimulation. you may be able to tell I really, really like mental stimulation. And in retirement, mental stimulation, well, unless you do something else to keep it going, it's gone. So mental stimulation is something that most people don't necessarily think they're going to be worried about or will be a concern in retirement, but it can be a very, very terrifying thing in retirement when you realize, wow, I'm just no longer having the mental stimulation that I've had for so many years. And I think it's a feeling of, is this it? Is this it? Is this it as far as my mental stimulation, as far as my personal development, those personal things that I mentioned? Of course, they're the financial things. But it's that feeling, especially if you're older like me, of, is this it? Is this as far as I'm going to go? And this question really led me to this drive to peak later in life, which I find really fascinating and fun because, well, it's fascinating and fun. Now, there's one more thing that's terrifying about retirement that I want to share with you, and that's not knowing that your plan didn't work until it's too late. And that is the really scariest thing I think about retirement. And it relates to, of course, the financial things that we've touched on in this video. And it relates to your longevity because no one knows how long they're going to live. Now I've given you actually 6 solid things about retirement that are terrifying. And remember, above all, retire certain.